If you're trying to land a cloud engineering interview, this video is for you. Today, we're going to cover what an interview practice may look like in today's market with tons of people using AI. This may or may not be something that you want to experience as a candidate in today's market. Let's get into it. So I want to cover an interview process that I experienced, and I want to give you some insight on it because you may also experience it as you're going through your job hunting process. I don't think that this process that I experience is as common, but it is interesting to say the least. And this process was brought to me by a recruiter reaching out to me. So it was inbound from a recruiter. They saw my profile, they reached out, they said, hey, I think you'll be a great fit for this role. And this was a process that they laid out to me. I want to give you as much detail as possible so you can understand what it was like and what my thoughts on it were as someone who's been through tons of interviews for cloud engineering and cloud adjacent roles. So the first step in the process after the initial phone screen with the recruiter was here. A take-home assessment, right? And the take-home assessment wasn't necessarily the shock because there's tons of opportunities out there that have assessments of some kind, but a take-home assessment where it required full access to everything. And when I say everything, I meant your screen share, your keystrokes, and live monitoring the whole time. And the live monitoring piece is something that I think is a little bit more interesting as I give you more details, but this was the very first stage. The recruiter said, hey, I think you're a great fit. I think they want to interview you, but you have to go through this take-home assessment. Now, like I said, assessments are normal, but take-home assessments come with a certain virality to it, in my opinion, and I'll get into that as we go. But ultimately, for you to even take the assessment, you have to grant the tool that they're using, the AI tool that they're using, full access to your screen, your keystrokes, and monitor you the whole time, right? And for you to even get started with the assessment, you have to verify your ID front and back and take a selfie, right? So not only do you have to do a take-home assessment, you also have to give up your personal information as well too. Your ID and a selfie. Now, I'm all for accepting some risk as you're going through an interview process because you're risking your time, you're risking your energy. You're like, okay, is this role better than this role? Should I even interview, et cetera, et cetera? But to have to give up your data immediately to get an opportunity at a job offer doesn't sit right with me as a candidate. And I'm sure it doesn't sit right with a lot of people, especially in today's day and age where people are getting robbed for their identities by AI, et cetera, et cetera. It just didn't sit right with me personally. And I expressed that to the recruiter as well too. Like, hey, not only is this a take-home assessment, meaning I have to do it outside of work hours, I have to set time aside for this assessment, but I also have to give up my data, my personal identifiable information for the opportunity to move forward in the process, right? That was a giant concern of mine personally. Now, along with this, you have to share everything. You can't like have a multi-monitor setup. So whenever you're taking a take-home assessment, I understand you have to be in a quiet location, et cetera, et cetera. But if you have like a home setup, a home office or something, and you have multiple monitors set up, that is out the window, right? It has to be single display only. You can't do multi-monitor. It has to be, you have to force everything to mirror one screen because that's how invasive the process is. And I get it. I'm like, okay, well, one monitor is cool, but like I said, if you already have a limited amount of time outside of work, you have to submit all of your personal identifiable information, and then you have to rework your home setup to take a take-home assessment. As a candidate, I don't think a lot of people would really want to do that, right? And along with that, you also will be watched from two angles for this process. So you're going to have your webcam watching your face, and then you also have to set up your phone or a mobile device to watch your hands and keyboard as you're going through the take-home assessment, right? So not only are you giving up your information, you're giving up your selfie, you're giving up your keystrokes, your screen share, you're also giving up two angles of what you're doing, right? One through the webcam, one watching your keyboard and mouse movements as you're taking the take-home assessment. So it just gets more and more intensive as you really get down into the process of what they're asking for with this. There's still more to come, but as I was going through this, I'm like, this can't be normal. And like I said, I'm making a video on this because this is the first time I've ever experienced this as a candidate. And this was something that I really wanted to go through it because of how uniquely terrifying this is for an interview, in my opinion. And from there, the assessment could be written or multiple choice. Like for this particular opportunity, it wasn't multiple choice. It was written. It was, hey, here's these 3 questions. I need you to go through and logic your way through how you would solve it, why you would solve it a particular way, et cetera, et cetera. But for this particular platform, it could be multiple choice. It could be written. But if they're going through this entire process, personally, I think if you're interviewing for a cloud engineering role or something cloud adjacent, it's probably going to be a written assessment rather than multiple choice. I don't think multiple choice questions necessarily gauge someone's thinking process or true experience or ability to logic their way through situations. So if you go through this exact same process, I'm going to probably assume that it's going to be a written assessment rather than multiple choice, right? Now, when you take it, it's not just a written assessment, right? There has to be a verbal explanation after you submit your answers. So it was supposed to be like a 45-minute assessment, but of course there's like 10, 15 minutes of prep time so you could get everything together, get your workstation set up, give it access, submit your information. So really it's about an hour, right? So once you submit your answers within the 45-minute period, you still have to go ahead and give a verbal explanation of why you chose the answers that you gave, right? So you're giving your written assessment being watched from both angles, so they know that it's you that wrote it, but then you also have to give a verbal explanation of the different reasons why you said, hey, this is the answer that I went with. That's a lot, in my opinion. That's a considerable amount of investment there for a take-home assessment, right? And you have to say them out loud. It has to be recorded. You only get one chance to record it, so make sure you don't mess up, right? But this is part of the process. And then from there, the payoff is that you get to potentially interview for a first round 90-minute interview, right? So you're going through all of this. You're giving up your personal information. You're redoing your workstation. You're taking the exam. And this is all for you to get the opportunity to get a first round 90-minute interview. So you can imagine as a candidate, you're like, well, especially if you have a job and you're already doing something. Let's say you're already working like an 8 to 5 or like an 8 to 7 or something. And then you got to go to the gym afterwards. You're doing all of this outside of work, giving up your data to get a chance to potentially land a first round interview that's going to be 90 minutes, right? But remember, finishing the assessment doesn't guarantee that you're going to get the first round, right? Because the assessment is to gauge your technical skills. What if you do all this prep, all this setup, all this data submission, you get recorded, your voice, your likeness, all of it is taken into this platform that you submit for an opportunity to get a first round at interviewing, and you don't get the interview. How frustrating would that be as a candidate in 2026 if that happened to you? I might be the outlier to feel a particular way about it, right? But you don't necessarily get a first round just because you go through the process. I really want to hammer that in, right? And after I went through this, here's the piece that really got to me about this process. Because like I said, I did this because I wanted to gather data. I wanted to understand what the process looks like because I may go through it again. But here's the piece that really made me be like, this may have just been a gargantuan waste of time. The recruiter admits that this is an invasive process, for one, and a prior candidate passed the exact same interview process. They passed the take-home assessment, and then when they got to the first round of the interview, they were giving shallow answers and they got rejected anyways, right? So just to be clear, the recruiter confirmed that a person before me took the exact same assessment, scored high just like I did, and then got to the actual interview, and then they didn't have the skills even after taking the exam. So then what's the actual assessment for? If it's designed to screen candidates and only give you quote unquote high quality candidates that know what they're talking about, how is it that this person made it through, got to the interview, and then just like could not elaborate or elucidate any of their technical skills? If low quality candidates are still getting through after giving up all of this, after going through the exact same process that I went through, what's the point? Like, you could say that as a candidate, I'm just like, I just wasted my time and gave up my data for no reason. Like, from my perspective, the logic behind implementing something like this is to only let high quality candidates go through so you're not wasting the time of your, let's say, leadership or your engineers who are performing the interview, because you only want to pull them off of their projects or their work because you want it to be worth their time and potentially valuable. But if low value or low quality candidates are getting through this exact same process, What's the point of it being in place anyways? Right? And then also a 90-minute first round interview is kind of insane, in my opinion. And mind you, the opportunity that this came from wasn't the company that you think. Not from like a Google, not from like a Microsoft, not from like a Meta or anything, right? I'm not going to say any names, but for such an invasive process like this, my expectations would be that it's from a extremely reputable company. But this is the first time I've ever seen or experienced an interview process like this. And I get it. Like in today's market, there's a lot of candidates who potentially cheat with AI. So there has to be like some type of buffer, some type of thing that businesses can use to weed those people out. But quite honestly, if you've ever interviewed someone or sat in an interview, it is so blatantly obvious to tell when someone's cheating with AI. I don't even think a process like this is necessary, efficient, or worthwhile from the candidate or from the interviewer's perspective. Personally, it's just very weird, invasive, and at least from the recruiter's perspective, not even worth it. Right? Now, let's move on from here. So this is the interview process that I experienced. It may not be something that you'll experience throughout your journey, but this is something that I want you to be cognizant of as you're going through things. But I also do want to consider, if you're presented with a process like this, you may want to think for you, because no one can decide if going through a process like this is even worth it, let alone worth it for you in specific. So here's like a roadmap that I would give you, or some type of mental map that you should consider if you're like, all right, cool, this role may or may not be for me. So first things first, do you have a job right now? Like I'll run into a lot of people who are like, oh, well, I don't want to accept this offer, or I think this is beneath me, or this isn't the income that I want to be at, when they get a job offer and they don't have a job. Like if you don't have a job, personally, any job is for you. It could be McDonald's, it could be help desk, it could be a server admin. If your end goal is cloud engineering and you haven't landed a cloud engineering role, but somebody gives you a different job offer, that job is for you, especially if you don't have a job, because any cash flow is better than no cash flow. So you may be faced with an interview opportunity like this and not have a job. I'm not going to tell you to, not go through the process if you don't have any cash flow, right? But this is the first question everybody should consider. First thing, do you have a job right now? And if the answer is no, you don't have a job, it's going to be different than yes, you have a job, right? So if you do have a job, any cash flow is better than no cash flow. And I would tell you to go through the process. But if you do have a job, the second question I would consider is it worth taking my time away from something that I'm already doing? Like I said, if this was presented, this opportunity to interview that I just described, if it was presented to a candidate that already has a job, that's already doing an 8 to 5, an 8 to 7, they're going to be like, well, I'm not getting paid for the take-home assessment, and I have to give up my data, and I have to rework my whole workstation. Is it even worth it for you to do that, right? Or could you just put in another 50 applications and get another interview that's not as invasive or time intensive? Right? But this is a question that I would ask. If you already have a job and someone presented this opportunity to you, is it worth taking your time away from things that you could be doing at work and things that you could be doing after work with your family, with your loved ones, with whatever else you got planned? Right? Now, from there, like I said, if you don't have a job, just go through the process. I mean, sometimes you're going to do things that you don't necessarily like, especially like submitting your PII just to have an interview. But if you really don't have a job and there's nothing else on your board, you don't have any other interviews, I would just go through the process. But like I said, realistically, if you have a job and someone said, hey, I need you to go take this 45-minute, really an hour, like I said, because you got to submit everything, an hour unpaid assessment that could be a waste of your time and you're giving up your data, I'm probably going to tell you, no, it's not worth your time to do, right? But ultimately, one thing I do want you to consider with opportunities like this or interview requests in general is, did you apply for the opportunity or did a recruiter reach out to you? Because I think that can give you a little bit more information about the opportunity or the business that has this opportunity, right? Because when you think about it, if you apply directly, you sought out the opportunity. Like tons of people apply to Google or tons of people apply to Microsoft because they know that it's quality, they know that it's going to give them longevity, et cetera, et cetera. I'm just listing those two companies because everybody knows them. But if you apply directly, it may be something that you already know is valuable, regardless of if you get the job or not. You're already submitting to the idea that you may not get chosen for it, but you know it's going to be valuable for you to go through the process, gather data, and learn from the experience. right? But if the recruiter reaches out to you, it could be considerably different, right? Especially if it's a third-party recruiter, right? Like if Microsoft reached out to you and the person that reached out to you was a recruiter from Microsoft, hey, they may think you're amazing because it's an internal recruiter from Microsoft. If it's a third-party recruiter, like let's say Microsoft hired some other third-party company, some no-name, like third-party recruiting company, they could be having a hard time filling the role for various reasons. But generally, if a business has to hire a third party to source candidates, either they don't have time to find the candidates themselves, they're not getting the quality of inbound candidates that they're looking for. What they're looking for may be something that's crazy that they're asking for. The pay may not align with what they're asking for, and a variety of other reasons. But this is something that these are all the things that would be going through my head when an opportunity is presented to me, especially if I don't like the interview process. Did the recruiter reach out to me, or did I apply or reach out to them directly? Things to consider, right? But if you reached out, I think that's a regular, normal path. Lots of people are applying for roles. But if the recruiter reaches out to you, it could be a heavy signal for a lot of different things. Like if a role is so well-paying, so well-cultured, so great for your career and longevity as a qualified candidate, why would they have such a hard time filling the role that they have to hire a third party? I would raise at least one eyebrow and consider that. It's going to be your job to interact with the recruiter as much as you can to get as much information as possible. But like in my case with the example of the process, when the recruiter told me, yeah, they get a lot of people that cheat with AI, so they have this process. And also the last person that got through also couldn't even interview. It just made me be like, this process is a waste of time, right? It makes me think that they may not necessarily be as efficient with their hiring process, especially if they have a 90-minute first round interview. And that could be the reason why it's unfilled. And that could be the reason why they're even hiring a third-party person anyways, right? But these are things that I would consider if you want to figure out if a role is for you, because you very well might come down to the end of this map and be like, this is normal. I'm ready to interview for this role. Or you got orange and red flags from the third party that reached out to you for the opportunity. Things to consider, right? Now, what would a regular, normal interview process look like, in my opinion, right? So I got some examples for you. So example A is like 1 or 2 rounds. Like some people have never been in a cloud engineering interview or any IT interview for that matter. But these are just 2 examples that I think you want to consider as you're looking for the role that's for you and you're going through the process, right? First round, let's say this example is for a 1 to 2 round process. First round, behavioral with leadership. This is usually where they see if you're a good culture fit, if you're sociable, if you have high communication skills or decent communication skills. If you're actually a real person and not AI, and you can explain your skill set and show the value that you can add from not necessarily a technical perspective, right? But I like when they have that first round with leadership. Great culture fit. Is this guy for us? Can he actually work here? Does he represent some of the values that we have as a business? This is what you should be expecting here. Now, the second round could be a technical with engineers and architects. And me personally, I like the opportunities where they have those separate. And the reason that I like the separation of these 2 rounds is because sometimes engineers or architects or the actual technical people pull their punches when you ask them difficult questions about their job. In the same way that they may interview you, you need to be interviewing them and figuring out if the role is for you. And when you put the engineers and the architects on the same call with the leadership people, they pull their punches sometimes about the difficult questions about what they do, and vice versa. I prefer to have these separate. In my opinion, I think it gives you the most value as a candidate. But this 1 to 2 rounds and then close is what I think is the type of interview process that you want to experience the most. I think this is the best interview process. And it gives you an opportunity to properly deal with bad interviewers, right? So let's say you get to a round. It could be the leadership round. It could be the technical round. And you have a bad interviewer. The same way that you have bad interviewers, you have bad interviewees, and vice versa. Someone could come into an interview and say, I'm looking to get hired as a cloud engineer, and be a terrible interviewer. And then the person asking the questions could also be a terrible interviewer. And when you're getting interviewed by a panel, it gives more of a balance. Let's say you have a panel of 4 people and 1 to 2 of those people are terrible at asking questions. They're terribly socialized engineers, and they give short questions, not enough details with their questions to ascertain your skill set. But you have 2 other people that are giving like the other end of the spectrum to be able to get you to open up, get you to talk about your skill set, et cetera, et cetera. I prefer to have panels because that can balance out some of the poor interviewers that exist. Like I've had interviewers from various companies where the person interviewing me has the social skills of drying paint and their questions aren't clear. And I'm having a hard time being able to understand what they're asking me to properly elucidate how I would solve a problem or some value that I could add to what they're asking me to solve. Those people exist. Sometimes it's not you as an interviewee, but the reason that I like panels is because they can balance those people out, because you really never know if you're going to get those people. Similarly with the leadership piece, you may have somebody that's very straight to the point. You may have someone that's a little bit more socially bubbly, but in an ideal interview for me, in my opinion, 1 to 2 rounds, 2 panel interviews where you separate the leadership people from the technical people, because that gives you better opportunity, in my opinion, right? But this is what I would like. And then, of course, it comes with the offer. And the reason I categorize this as 1 to 2 rounds, some people might say, oh, well, what about the recruiter screen? I don't really count recruiter screens as interviews. It's part of the interview process, but I don't have it in this map because, I mean, in my opinion, it's a first round, but not necessarily the most important first round. I might make a separate video on that, but this is one example. Now, another example is just one and done. And you can guess exactly what's in this map. Literally a single round with a panel of engineers and leaders, and then it just progresses to an offer. I like these, but not as much as I like these, because you only get 1 round. It may not necessarily be longer than an hour. I haven't seen a lot of interviews where it's 90 minutes. I can count on one hand where I've ever seen an interview go longer than an hour at most. But if you have the engineers and the leadership on the same panel, I think both sides, the technical and non-technical people, are going to be pulling punches when you ask them difficult questions. And I don't necessarily think it's going to give you time to adjust as you go through the interview, because it's only 1 round. And I just don't think that it gives you the best opportunity to perform as a candidate, because you're mentally going to be dabbling between technical and non-technical, and I feel like those should be separate, even if it takes more time or drags out the process. Does this work? Yes. Have I seen a lot of opportunities where it's just one and done? Yes. But personally, I think segregating the rounds is better for the interviewers and the interviewees. That's just my opinion. But these are some examples of what this should look like. But ultimately, going back to this interview process here, right? Why, as I go through it, as I thought about this before I made the video, I was like, this just seems unfavorable to any candidate. And you might be thinking, okay, well, Charles, you're not that special to think that you shouldn't be subject to an interview process like this. And I get it. It's not that I think I'm above the process, but I think that objectively, this is a very invasive, drawn out process that hurts both the candidate and the business as well too. If the goal is, hey, we want to screen people as efficiently and as timely as possible to figure out if they're worth our time, I think you should just go ahead and invest the time of whoever's interviewing to make that happen. If anything, I think you should adopt the methodology of hire fast and fire fast. Because if people are still not qualified and they go through this entire process, like the recruiter confirmed, there's no point in the process at all. It just doesn't make any sense. But I get it. In today's day and age where there's a lot of AI cheaters, if you guys aren't familiar with some of the interviews that I have on my channel, like pause this video and go and watch this video. Acing a 6-figure cloud interview. In the first, one of the very first things they told me in this interview was that there are tons of AI cheaters. And personally, in my opinion, you can tell when someone's cheating with AI. It's undeniable. Like, I've personally had my peers perform interviews and say, hey, we just walked out of an interview for this, I don't know, this DBA or something. And within the first 15 minutes, we could tell that we're using AI. But we sat through the whole 45-minute, hour interview just because. It's like, everyone knows. Everyone knows when you're cheating with AI. If you notice someone's cheating with AI, just chop the interview. Move on to the next candidate. I get it. You may be going through tons and tons of other candidates, but I just don't think it's worth it to implement a process like this or go through a process like this if you may be in the position where you have a job. If you have nothing, maybe this process might be reasonable and savory to you, but personally, I don't think so. But this was just an opportunity that I want you to be aware of as you're looking for your best fit or the role that best suits you in the cloud engineering space. This is something that you may come across. This is something that you may experience. And hopefully this gave you some insight to what that looks like, or what a reasonable, or in my opinion, more reasonable interview process would look like and what might work for you, right? But definitely check out that other interview that I was showing you a second ago. Hopefully it'll add some value, and stay tuned for other interviews. But as always, I'll see you in the next one.